What is going on, everyone? It is College Football Talk, and I am your host, Hunter DeLauder, and today is Week 11 recap. There was a lot that happened this past weekend. A lot of big-time teams went down. There was quite a few upsets, and some teams just continue to move along. So we're going to dive into all of it today, so make sure you guys are subscribing to the podcast. We're on the road to 200 subscribers, so the only way to do that is to hit that subscribe below. If you're watching, you're not subscribed, hit that button. And if you're new around here, welcome aboard. Make sure you're hitting that button. As always, though, make sure you're also liking and sharing the videos as well. So without further ado, though, we are going to get right into it because we have a lot to talk about. And why waste more time? So we're going to kill the music. And we're going to start with probably the game of the day, the team of the day. Ole Miss, number 16 Ole Miss, dominates number 3 Georgia, 28-10. It was outside of the first about 2 drives for both teams, just in total like 1-1. It was an Ole Miss beatdown, and credit to Ole Miss here because it was not the start they wanted. Obviously, it was a picture perfect start for Georgia. They 2 back-to-back sacks. They force an interception. They get Jackson Dart banged up. He has to go to the locker room for a couple minutes. But Georgia's on offense now. They take over. They get all the way down to the goal line. They go for it on 4th and goal. They get in. They score a touchdown to go up 7-0. And then the backup quarterback, Austin Simmons, comes in for Ole Miss. But then from that moment on, it was as if like the whole just dynamic shifted because Austin Frazier goes right down the field and scores at like a blink of an eye. And all of a sudden, like Georgia's almost like kind of not maybe shell shocked, but just kind of like taken back, like what just happened. We just had our lead just disappear with blink of an eye. Some Georgia fans probably getting PTSD from it was a lefty backup coming in. That's a Tua Tagovailoa reference right there. But he went right down the field, and then after that, Jackson Dart came back in. He didn't really skip a beat, and Georgia's offense stalled. From that moment on, after that first drive, it was tough going. I'll say that. Georgia's first half stats, 7.69 yards. They only had 20 yards rushing and obviously 49 yards passing. They just could not get anything going. The flaws that have plagued this team all year showed up in this game today or on Saturday. Drops by the receivers. Offensive line struggling. Missing throws. Defensively, they weren't able to get pressure on Jackson Dart, so Jackson Dart was able to just do whatever he wanted in the backfield or do whatever he wanted, just trying to throw to an open guy. Receivers were being left open. And, they could not run the football at all. It was a defensive masterclass for Ole Miss. Ole Miss was living in the backfield the whole game. And it's one thing that almost concerned me a little bit going into the game because I thought, Georgia's offensive line's been okay at best this year, at least for Georgia standards. They've been, injured throughout the lineup, but, they're plugging and playing. They're getting some of the guys back healthy, but they're going up against a defensive line that leads the nation in sacks, is a run-stopping unit at its finest, and can get and just wreak havoc any way, shape, or form. And that's what they did. They came into this game with 18 sacks in the last 2 weeks. They came in the game with 42 sacks on the season, most in college football. They had 5 sacks again, Ole Miss did, 9 tackles for loss. Jared Ivey was an animal out there. He had 7 tackles, 2 sacks, a couple of tipped passes. One of them was a big tipped pass that led to a Carson Beck interception. It would have been a first down for Georgia. Instead, it becomes a pick. Even didn't matter because it would have been a turnover on downs anyway. Princely Umanmielen had a couple big plays. He had 2 sacks as well, forced fumble. Soteria Perkins had another big day. It just unraveled so fast for Georgia in this game. It just completely unraveled. You get the picture perfect start, and then all of a sudden, just like that, it's all gone. And all of a sudden, credit to the defense, I guess, a little bit for bending and don't breaking because they got worked in the first half, and they kept Ole Miss out of the end zone a few times, because this easily could have been a much bigger blowout than what the score indicates. And even that score right there doesn't even indicate how bad of a loss Georgia took on Saturday. UGA's drive chart for the whole game. Whole game. This just shows you how dominant Ole Miss was defensively. Touchdown for short field, though, off the turnover. Punt, 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 and a half. Field goal, but they stalled in the red. They stalled in the inside the 10. Fumble, Ole Miss territory. Nate Frazier was a terrible fumble. And then an interception inside. Both turnovers took place inside Ole Miss territory. And then another fumble because Ernest Green was playing with meatballs for brains the whole game and could not stop anybody. He probably was the worst weak link on that O-line Saturday. I mean, the whole offensive line played like doggy doo-doo. But his performance was just terrible. He was getting beat off the ball all game long. And people are getting mad, like Beck needs to hold on the football and needs to stop fumbling it. Well, if he's getting smoked on his blind side every other play, the odds of him fumbling the football go significantly up because he's not aware of who's coming up behind him. I mean, he's just doing what he can, and it's raining. It's gross. I'm not saying that's like an excuse or anything. I think it's just more of the fact that he doesn't know who's behind him because Ernest Green's just letting anybody through. And then they had the turnover and downs at the end of the game. It didn't matter at that point. Georgia finished with 245 yards. It's a season low. It's the lowest since 2017. They went 6 of 14 on third down. They only rushed the ball for 59 yards. I said going into the game they were going to need to run the football. They were going to need to find a way to run the football enough and not become one-dimensional. They ran the ball, I think, 33 times on average. They only averaged 1.8 yards per carry. Obviously, that's not good by any stretch of the means. I'm trying to see if I can find this one video here. Give me 1 second. There it is. Okay. So it's on desktop. I'm just talking to myself, right? I'm going to show the clip of what I said on here we go. This is the clip. It's there, but you're going to have to be able to run the ball effectively enough because what Ole Miss is going to want you to do is, they're going to want to try to just shut down the run game and force you to pass, and that's what this offense can't allow happen. Even with Ole Miss's struggles defensively, stopping the pass, they want Georgia, I think, to become that one-dimensional pass-first offense and just kind of forget about the run. Because obviously, if you can do that, then you're going to make Beck more susceptible. Kind of like Garrett Nussmeier, you're going to make them more susceptible to turning the football over. Even if Georgia is getting stuffed and there's there's just no momentum running the football, they're going to have to find a way to keep trying to run the football. Golly gee, who would have thought? Who would have thought that would have been the key to success, trying to run the football? And, I don't know what happened with Trevor Etienne, but he was in and out of the game. He wasn't in the game for a good part of the late first half, early second half. And then Nate Frazier started coughing the football up some. Cash Jones probably played the best game offensively, him and Carson Beck. Carson Beck played one of his better games of the year, but he got no help on the offensive line. Receivers, the receiving core has been so lackluster this year. They lead the nation in dropped passes. There was about 3 or 4 that could have been big-time drive, could have helped out the drive, continued the drive. Instead, it stalled it or led to a disaster play. I look at the Ben Urasek play, late first half. They're driving. They're just on the other side of Ole Miss territory. So they're in Ole Miss territory. It's a beautiful run. It's a beautiful play concept. They get Urasek almost like on a wheel route, it looks like, and he's wide open. And the ball hits him right in the chest. And he drops it. And I think it was a play later. Then Beck gets sacked because the offensive line sucks. And then they ended up having to punt. So it was a disaster all around for Georgia. Ole Miss, though, we're talking about Georgia all this. We talked about Ole Miss defensively. And I was really impressed defensively, how well the D-line got after it. But they really helped out, with the pass defense, which has been statistically terrible this year. They made some plays when they needed to, for sure. They obviously the interception. There was a couple big time hits they made that jarred balls loose, and they just did a really nice job keeping it has the potential to be a really explosive offense for Georgia. It's just not right now. But Ole Miss offensively, though, looked really good. They stalled a couple times in the red zone, but I mean, they were getting down there in the blink of an eye. They had 397 total yards of offense, 263 yards passing. They ran the ball effectively enough. They did have the one turnover at the beginning of the game, but outside of that, it was a really good day offensively. And I mean, there's not really much more to say. I mean, the offensive line I thought really played well. I talked about that as well. If Georgia's defensive line was going to be able to wreak havoc, kind of like in the Texas game, and just take over, especially against an offensive line for Ole Miss that has had its issues this season protecting Jackson Dart. And at the beginning of the game, it looked like, oh no, here we go again. They settled in and they gave their quarterback time to work, and he completely dissected that secondary, shredded them to pieces. And this was without Trey Harris, and that who's obviously their best weapon. But I mean, George Watkins was making plays, Prescorn was making plays. The whole arsenal of weapons were out there making plays on Saturday. And if you're Georgia, I said this was the season right here. This 2-game stretch was going to be the season. And if you were going to split it, well, now it leaves you no room for error, being it's your second loss now. I guess the bright spot is that they get to go back home and, flush this down the toilet, go back home for the final 3 games of the year. You have Tennessee coming in. Tennessee, we'll see what the health is with Nico, who left the game in the, I forget if it was the late first half, early second half. He left the game with an upper body injury. They kept him out for precautionary reasons, so we'll see how he's doing. But, I mean, your season's on the line Saturday if you want to make the playoff. I just don't think with a loss there on Saturday, you're going to have enough on the resume to get you in, because you're not going to be in the SEC title game. You're going to have 3 losses. And there's just too much other good teams around you right now to, let you try to backdoor your way in. So they're going to have to show up ready to roll Saturday. If they don't, well, it is what it is. And then you honestly just have to flush this and finish out the season strong, take whatever bowl game you get and ride into next year. But, that's, you can't be looking down like that. Georgia still can go out and win a national title, for all I know. It's just the issues offensively they just aren't getting resolved. And at this point, it's almost like, is it even fixable at this point? Because, you just keep waiting. You just keep waiting for something to change, and it's not. It's just not. Whether it be the offensive line fixing itself right, them trying to run the football enough, just the pass catchers being able to just catch a football. It's just terrible. We have a lot of great – it looks like we have a lot of great defensive backs on offense, where they're not catching the football. So hopefully, let's see if it gets fixed. I mean, they have their season's on the line, like I said, on Saturday. For Ole Miss, listen, this is a team that can go out and sneak their way in and win the national title game. They get into the playoff. This is not there's not a team out there that wants to draw this team if they get into the playoffs, because Ole Miss has every quality needed to win a national title. And especially if you get Trey Harris back later on in the season, and they still may not go to the SEC title game, but if they win out here, they're for sure locked to get in. I mean, you have an outstanding defensive line and linebacker group. You have a secondary it's vulnerable for sure, but with that type of pass rush, it's almost kind of coding what their flaws are. But if it's working, it's working. And offensively, if you have a veteran quarterback who's able to make plays with his feet and with his arm, you have a plethora of riches on the outside, and you have an offensive line that's all right, and running back group that's good enough. And especially if they can get Henry Parrish back too, who's also banged up. Again, this is a dangerous, dangerous team. Both these teams are dangerous. But right now, Ole Miss is the most, I think, underrated team. A lot of people are saying that. I am of the opinion as well that this is one of the more underrated teams in the country. I still don't think they're properly rated ranked where they are. I think they moved up to I forget where they got ranked, but I think they finally got into the top 10. And even then, like, this is a dangerous, dangerous group. So right here, but they go into the bye this week, and then they go to Florida. Georgia obviously has Tennessee before as they wrap up SEC play. A lot to play for both teams, but a very, very impressive and dominant win for Ole Miss. And credit to Lane Kiffin, who one of the big reasons why I picked Georgia is because I just thought that, Lane Kiffin is yet to show you that he's able to win the big game like this. I saw a stat, forget if it was top 5 or top 2 opponents, like ranked wise, the last 4 times that Kiffin's played a top 5 team or it was a top 5 or top 3 team, that the average margin of points given up was 52 a game. It's just a complete like 360, not even a 180, a 360 on how well they played. And realistically, Ole Miss, you didn't trail in the LSU game until the final play of the game when you lost. The Kentucky game, Kentucky needed a miracle 4th down play to keep the game alive. So you're 2 plays away from being undefeated right now. Like, that's how dangerous this team is. And they were getting pushed back, kind of being forgotten about. And here they are again. All right. Sticking in the SEC, though, but moving on to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where Alabama drains the Bayou and defeated LSU 42-13. Boy, oh boy, was it a beatdown in Baton Rouge, and it was never competitive. Alabama never gave LSU a chance to even sniff trying to come back in this one. Jalen Milroe put on a clinic on Saturday. He did exactly what he did last year. And if I were to tell you, or no, I'm going to say that if I were to tell you for the next game. Anyway, Jalen Milroe, he had 185 yards rushing. He had 4 touchdowns. He averaged 15 yards a carry. It started on the first drive when they went right down the field and he broke one off for a big time touchdown. It was that one and really like the last one, the knockout blow that just completely just sucked all the air out of the building. Alabama had LSU, or let me repeat that. Alabama had Tiger Stadium empty by like the start of the fourth quarter. I mean, that's how bad of a beatdown it was. And Alabama ran the ball really well. That's been the big thing this year is you've been too reliant on Jalen Milroe, and you haven't been able to run the ball very well. And it was whether it was Milroe injured, was he not? Was it just something was up? Well, they ran the ball really well. 311 yards rushing. They averaged 6.5 yards a carry. Just really nice to see Alabama right there take advantage of, getting back to kind of like who they are some. I think that's what they mentioned a lot of going into the game was, we need to figure out what we are and stick with it. And this is who we are. We're going to try to be a run the ball first, physical type team. And they did exactly that. And they stayed ahead of schedule too. Something I brought up last week on the preview show is if LSU could get Alabama pinned back behind schedule on these 3rd and longs, they could have really big success. Well, Alabama stayed ahead of schedule and they weren't ever in 3rd and long. Their longest 3rd and long was a 3rd and 9. They were 10-13 on 3rd down. They stayed on the field. LSU couldn't get them off the field. And Alabama had 7 of those 3rd down conversions were 3rd and 5 or less. I mean, picture perfect. They stayed out of penalty trouble. They still had like 70 yards of penalties, but they stayed out of penalty trouble. And the defense showed up. The defense is slowly bringing itself into form some, which means that like those young guns in the back end are really starting to kind of find their form, find their their path here, like what their purpose is and job for this Alabama defense. The Alabama defense forced 3 turnovers, a really big turnover in the red zone. They had a couple sacks, and they just were creating pressure all night long. LSU couldn't run the ball at all. Outside of like one big Caden Durham run, there was nothing there. And as for LSU, one of the biggest reasons why Alabama or Jalen Milroe specifically had so much success running the football so well is LSU's linebackers got lost in the shuffle the entire night long. I went back and watched the replay of the game. Their linebackers were guessing on the wrong holes, just getting lost in the shuffle, And all of a sudden, like, they're going one way, Milrow's going the other way, and he's 30 yards downfield, and then they're just finally getting off of the offensive line that they've been stuck to because they hit the wrong hole. And offensively for LSU, it just looked stale. Kind of looked just the play calling wasn't there. Nussmeier wasn't really getting his playmakers involved. Kyron Lacy had the biggest night, and he only had 5 catches. And he scored a touchdown, but that touchdown came with under 30 seconds left in the game. Mason Taylor really wasn't a factor. He had like one like notable catch, and that was it. He only had 4 catches. Aaron Anderson only had 3 catches. Like, you got to be getting your playmakers involved in a game like this. Like, have to be getting more. I mean, Kyron Lacy should never have 5 catches in a game like this. Needs to be feeding him the football. That's what you had to do, and they didn't. And Nussmeier's struggles continue. We're talking about how bad Carson Beck's been, turning the football over, and just having like a very, very mediocre type season. Well, Garrett Nussmeier is very close to joining him in that department. He had 2 more turnovers. He went 27 of 42 for 239 yards. Had the 1 touchdown at the end, but the 2 turnovers were killer turnovers. One of them came off a 4th. The first one was a fumble after Alabama got stopped on 4th down in LSU territory. So LSU gets a huge stop. The very first play of the drive, Nussmeier fumbles it. And LSU has to go right back on the field on defense. And I believe Alabama went down and scored a touchdown. And then the second one came right at the start of the half, or right after the half. They go right down the field. It looks like it's 21-6, but it's still a ball game. You score a touchdown here, you're right back in it. And Nussmeier, I don't know where in the world he was trying to throw this football. But you had 2 guys going across, but there was 4 Alabama defenders. And Deontay Lawson, kind of pushes this one guy off to another guy. And Lawson's just standing there in front of the end zone. And Nussmeier throws it right to him. I don't know where he was trying to throw it. Maybe to the guy behind him, maybe a little bit. But even he was covered. So I just don't know what the mindset was there. You can't making that silly type of a decision right there. You have to either, if you just realize that he's not open, know the situation that I can't turn the football over here, live to fight another day, and just throw it away. Instead, he forces one. It's just an ugly play. And it completely just kind of killed any sort of momentum that LSU had somewhat brought together. It was completely vanished after that point, and Alabama never let them they never let them sniff having any hope, and that was kind of like the final straw in the camel's back, I think is how it says it. But yeah, that was it. Like I said, the LSU red zone struggles continue to be an issue all year long. They had 3 trips Saturday night, and they only had the 1 touchdown. And again, they had to settle for a field goal for another one, and then the bad pick. If you're LSU, you just have to realize that your playoff hopes are probably done now. You're hoping that like this doesn't just derail the season now, because they have to go to Florida this week before. Who do they have remaining? Let's see who they have left on the docket. I'm going to look it up here. Please stand by as we look up LSU's schedule, because we are all right. So you have LSU, you have Florida, then you have Vanderbilt, and then Oklahoma to finish out the year. So it's a manageable schedule down the stretch here. You have the one last, big test I'd say is Florida, because you have to go to the Swamp. But outside of that, like, it's a very manageable stretch. To finish the regular season out strong, go to a bowl game, and finish the year out right. But you're kind of starting to get now to the point in the season where you're starting to just kind of check teams off the list here as not even check more, just like cross them off. Like they're kind of, playoff hopes wise, they're not there. That's LSU because they're not going to go into the SEC title game. And they're doing what Georgia is trying to avoid this upcoming Saturday is get beat at home and watch your playoff dreams kind of get shattered right in front of your eyes. That's what LSU did, except they got just bamboozled. And they had Omar Bradley, the Tiger, there from they brought him in from Florida. Omar Bradley, hate to see it for sure. But if you're Alabama, listen, you're right there in the thick of things. And as right now with this there's a doomsday scenario where there's about 6 or 7 SEC teams. If they all finish with 2 losses, there's a scenario out there where if I believe that happens, Bama's in the SEC title game. I mean, they were written off after losing not just to Vanderbilt, but to Tennessee. Everyone kind of just forgets about them. Then they struggle with South Carolina, and it's just like, what's going on? But now, listen, they finished the year out right. I mean, obviously, they need to show up and play ready to roll because at any point, any of these teams are vulnerable. We've obviously seen, but I mean, everything's right there in front of them for Alabama. All right, moving on, though. Now to the ACC, where Georgia Tech, the rambling wreck of Georgia Tech, stun number 4 Miami, give Miami their first loss of the year. And if I were to tell you that Miami and Cam Ward, the throw for 348 yards, average almost 9 yards of completion, 3 touchdowns. They rush the ball for 88 yards. They only give up 28 points. You'd say, okay, well, obviously, they didn't have success running the football, but defensively, I mean, hey, they're only giving up 28 points. I mean, that's big time for what they've been allowing recently. But then what if I told you then that Georgia Tech, and I told you that Georgia Tech only threw the ball for 99 total yards. 99 total yards in passing. Like, yeah, for sure, Miami's put me down. And I would almost have to agree with you. But then what if I just kind of threw in right there, like, oh, yeah, by the way, Georgia Tech's going to rush for 271 yards and average almost 7 yards a carry. You'd be like, whoa. And also, I just throw in also that Georgia Tech had almost 11 more minutes of time, almost 10 more minutes of time of possession, and created 3 sacks, couple turnovers, and called it a day. And stalled Miami in the red zone. We're like, well, you'd think maybe Miami would still win it, right? Maybe no, it was all Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech took it to Miami. They did what other teams have failed to do, and that's get a lead on them. Obviously, they got a lead on them, but some teams have done. But they weren't able. Other teams like Cal, Virginia Tech, Duke, they weren't able to finish them. Georgia Tech never left a doubt. They were never going to just let Miami just walk away. They tried to a little bit, but they never actually let it happen. And that's a real big credit to Brent Key and this offense that was able to just control the clock by running the football really well. Miami, you play with fire enough, you're going to get burned, and that's just what happened today. Georgia Tech did an exceptional job at attacking the edge attacking the edge when running the football. They really did a good job of the outside zone stuff, read option type ordeal. Like Jamal Haynes looked really good. Haynes King was running all over him. Missed tackles were a big issue. Missed assignments. There was a couple touchdown passes that Georgia Tech was able to get with. But, I mean, to beat Miami with only 99 yards passing is pretty impressive. Not to mention you only hold them to 23 points. That's even more impressive. Because, you'd think, well, Georgia Tech, if they have to win this, they're going to need to, obviously, they're going to need to put a bunch of points up. You're at least maybe 31, 35. No, 28 was the number. And again, that's really because they were able to play so well at controlling the clock and running the football that it didn't matter. And then Miami, they held Miami receivers defensively. None of the receivers like Restrepo to have over 100 yards. I mean, that was really big. And to hold, a decent running attack to just 88 yards, they have some pretty good guys in that backfield. Martinez, with Fletcher and company, like they have some dudes. They did a really nice job. They created the big sack fumble at the end of the game that ended up clinching it. If you're Miami, though, I mean, it's not Cam Ward's fault for sure. People are saying like, oh, that goes Cam Ward's Heisman hopes. Like, no, Cam Ward played a really, really good game, actually. He had, again, 348 yards, 3 touchdowns. The one fumble came at the end of the game when he got sacked and lost it. I mean, they struggled mightily on third down. 3 of 10 on third down, 1 of 4 on fourth down. Couldn't really run the ball, obviously. And the defensively, that's the big problem right here. I mean, defensively, they are pathetic against ACC opponents. They've been really bad, really outside of the Florida game. I mean, that was the real only complete game this team has played to this point. Even the USF game, they only allowed 15 points, but that was a game I mean, the USF had moments. They just missed them in the red zone. So, like, it's not been a complete game for Miami. And ever since they've been in ACC play, like, it's just been really, really shaky. And finally the wheels came off and they crashed because, I mean, they let the 72nd scoring offense rush for almost 300 yards on you and put up 28 points. Here's Miami against ACC opponents and those opponents scoring offense rank. So obviously Georgia Tech 72nd. Duke is 76th in the country in scoring offense. They allowed 31 points. FSU is 133rd. They just fired their OC. They gave up 14. Louisville, 45 points allowed. That's really the best team that they've played offensively. They are 18th. But Cal, 38 points allowed, 62nd. Virginia Tech, 34 points allowed. They're 59th. Against ACC opponents, they're averaging now, they're giving up 31.6 points per game. And it means that this team is super vulnerable each and every week because you're just allowing mediocre offenses to just put points up on you. And you're forcing your quarterback to play Superman with this exceptional passing game. And I just don't know how that's sustainable. That's not championship, winning, recipe right there. You have to be able to play some defense a little bit. They're not even bending and not breaking. They're just breaking on defense. So they're going to need to figure that out well. It's just Georgia Tech has got the best of them now, 2 years in a row. Miami has Wake Forest, Syracuse, and either that's it or they have somebody else. I can't remember. But see now, I mean, they've got to be able to play defense if they want to get to where they want to be. I have no issues with their offense. The offense is mighty capable of doing anything they want. But if they can't stop anybody, then you're putting yourself in a situation like this, where if your offense has a bad day, you're very, very susceptible to losing. And that's what happened. So credit to Georgia Tech, though. Brent Key gets his signature win. Brent Key is a menace against ranked opponents at home. I forget what the number is, but it's some really crazy stat that you do not want to play Georgia Tech as a ranked opponent. So that's all I'm going to say. Moving on, though, to the late night game that happened, and it was fantastic if you stayed up and watched it or just saw the replay of it. Holy War, BYU and Utah. Stop, Siri. Anyway, so number 9 BYU needed a miracle to beat Utah. 22-21 was the final. Both quarterbacks I thought played really well. Jake Retzlaff it wasn't even like some crazy stat line game. It was just he was 15-33, 219 yards, he had one touchdown rushing, nothing passing, but he made big throws when he needed to. And Brendan Rose, the third string quarterback for Utah. Wilson did not start in this game. Rose comes in, he plays pretty well. 12 of 21, 112 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had one bad pass that ended up in the pick. But he stepped up big being the third string quarterback. And he got his playmakers going. He got Brent Keefe going. He had a couple touchdowns. Dorian Singer had a few nice catches. Like, he did his job. They ran the ball pretty well with Bernard. Again, it was a decent night for Utah offensively, given how limited they've been with injuries and such. But BYU special teams was a real big difference maker in this game. They had a couple big field goals made, obviously one of them being a game-winning field goal, and a big kickoff return touchdown that kind of seized back the momentum temporarily after Utah went right down the field and scored a touchdown. It was a real big momentum swinger before Utah kind of found their momentum back again and went up 11 at one point. But it was the ending of the game that kind of been made the big storyline. So I'll kind of go through it if you didn't watch it. So Utah had the ball with a chance to pretty much ice the clock out or run the clock out. They don't, thanks to a big holding call that kind of pushed them back to a 3rd and long. They ended up not getting it. They punted it away. They pinned BYU back at the BYU 9-yard line with 1:47 to go. BYU's first 3 passes were incomplete. I was a little taken back by the decision they started just kind of chucking the ball down the field when really you could have just got a couple, you could have just settled for a few short passes to get yards after the catch and kind of get a drive going. Because again, It was 22-19, or excuse me, 21-19, and you only need a field goal. And they don't convert on anything on the first 3 plays. So now you get to the 4th down. And this is when things start to get wild. So it appears Utah stops him. Retzlaff is like running around in the end zone, and he just kind of throws the ball out of bounds. But he's saying, like, listen, there was a time he heard a timeout, I guess a whistle being called. The stadium was going berserkers, just noise level wise. So like, you couldn't hear anything. I couldn't hear anything. I was watching it on TV. And so they showed the replay of Sataki racing to the official, calling a timeout, and the timeout being given. They just couldn't hear the whistle. So they awarded, obviously, because they said it became before the snap. So they redo 4th down. And again, Retzlaff, it gets bum rushed. He gets smoked, sacked. It looks like the game's over. This Rice-Eccles Stadium is on a different planet right now, just going berserkers, going wild. And all of a sudden, there's a flag down. And you're like, oh, no. They're like, what? And it's in the secondary. They're like, oh, no. Yeah, but that's like if you're a Utah fan. If you're a BYU fan, you're like, hang on. What is that? It was a defensive holding call. And boy, oh boy, was it a very, very ticky-tack call, to say the least. If we're going to be frank with it. I didn't see a whole lot there. It looked like a play that gets played every single down. It was a slight hold with the arm. But again, that wasn't much and really had no impact on the route itself. But the flag comes out pretty much almost immediately. And so BYU fans, or BYU gets second life. Utah doesn't know like what just hit them. Like they're just mad as a hornet right now. But then Retzlaff delivers a big time pass down the field for a 30-yard pickup to Chase Roberts. And then another pass for another 12 yards. And then Hinckley or Rapati rushed for a big 14-yard run that gets all the way down to the Utah 30. So now you're in field goal range. And now it's just like, what just happened now? Like BYU is about to win this game. BYU 4th down and 11 from the Utah 26. Will Ferrin drills a 44-yarder and wins it. And just like that, BYU stays alive to stay undefeated, and they just stay right there in the thick of things in the playoff race, in the Big 12 race. But going back to this ending here for a second, you just hate to see a game, and the officiating's been piss poor all year long. Not just in this game, but in games all across the country all year long. And you just hate to see a game that was so good kind of have some sort of controversy like that at the end of the game. And the Utah AD, Mark Harlan, said after the game, and he set himself like a press conference, and you never see this. He says, this game was absolutely stolen from us. We were excited about being in the Big 12, but tonight I am not. We won this game. Someone else stole it from us. And he later went on to say he will be contacting the league office about it. He has since been fined by the Big 12, ironically enough. I've never seen an AD come out and just say they stole it from us. Well, they could have. They might have. But your defense sold too at the end of the game, where they could have just bowed up and just made another big stop, and they didn't. So, you could have also scored more points and not put yourself in that situation. So there's a lot of factors. It's a big factor, but it's also, you could say that that's holding. It has to get called. Just because it's at the end of the game doesn't mean that it's any more, it's not, immune to not getting called. Like, it doesn't have some sort of protection. Like, if it's a penalty, it's going to get called. So, they're getting like this TCU 2021, just end of the game type magic. I tweeted this out. If you're BYU, and they just keep finding ways to win. They're not out of the woods, so they still have a big time game on the road in a couple weeks at Arizona State, and Arizona State just keeps on chugging along, winning. I mean, Kenny Dillingham, this group, they got another big win on Saturday against UCF, and that's a very, very sneaky game right there. If you're looking to look for any upsets happening, keep your eye out for that one. All right, We're moving on now to around the country time because we have a lot of games to talk about that weren't necessarily headliners but need to be talked about. All right. We're going to start with the Friday slate here. We're going to bang right through these things. Cal beat Wake Forest on Friday night to get their first ACC win in program history. Love to see it. Round of applause right there. It's crazy that you feel like Cal's been a lot better team than what the record shows. Obviously, that can happen. Don't let anybody say you are what your record says you are. I mean, they just, they've had a couple tough breaks. You lose the terrible loss to Florida State. You let the Miami game slip away from you, but you get a big win on the road at Wake Forest. UCLA with a very impressive win at home against Iowa. They just controlled the game, the whole game, and never gave Iowa any chance. Iowa did have to run through some quarterback issues with injury-wise because Brendan Solomon got hurt. But nonetheless, UCLA gets a big win after starting the year 1-5. They are now 4-5 with 2 back-to-back big-time wins against Nebraska and Iowa. So, all right, I'll move it on to Saturday, though. Number 1, Oregon, again, very business-like and just taking care of their business, not messing around with anyone. 39-18, they beat Maryland. Ohio State crushed Purdue 45-0. Everyone's tired of this cupcake schedule they play, even Gus Johnson. Go back and watch the call. He is there's no energy from him. You wonder why. They do have a big game coming up in a few weeks at home against Indiana, so hopefully they'll be ready to roll for that one. Number 5, Texas crushed Florida. They were up on Florida 35-0 at half. They were up 42-0 at one point, and then Napier playing just coward ball, kicking a field goal to even just to keep the non-shutout streak alive, this pointless shutout streak that they've had. It's pointless, and to do that, now they scored a few touchdowns at the end of the game, so it didn't obviously matter, but at the time at hand, it was like, what are we doing? Seriously. Texas ended up beating them 49-17. Quinn Ewers, 19-27. Here we go. 333 yards and 5 touchdowns. That's called being efficient right there. And really nice game from Texas. Florida, lick your wounds. Hopefully DJ Lagway's ready to roll. He missed. Obviously, he was out this game, but hopefully he's ready to roll for LSU coming into town. Penn State beat Washington. It was the whiteout game. And how about Penn State? Offense looked really good. They scored multiple times, touchdowns in the first half, something they didn't do last week, and they could have. They ended up beating Washington 35-6. Number 7, Tennessee beat Mississippi State 33-14. Shout out Mississippi State for covering at the end. And but the big story, Nico Amaliava got banged up in this game. He left the game with the upper body injury. I think we talked about this a little bit ago, but he left the game and was held out for precautionary reasons. So we're gonna have to monitor that throughout the week because obviously massive game this Saturday in Athens with Tennessee going to town. Number 8, Indiana holds on and beats Michigan. Michigan started a little late rally there, but could not find a way to take the lead. Indiana holds on. They only rushed the ball, I think, for 40 yards and still won. So really credit them for that. Indiana 10-0 on the season. Just keeps on moving. Sorry about this, guys. I have no idea why the sudden yawning just happened, but we're just going to adapt and overcome here. Number 10, Notre Dame steamrolls FSU 52-3. They beat him so bad. FSU finally started firing coaching staff members. Mike Norvell yesterday fired the DC, the OC, and the wide receiver coach. Excuse me. Boise State beat Nevada. Ashton Jeanty rushed for 34 carries, 209 yards, and had 3 more touchdowns. He was amazing resume he's built this year. So the Heisman candidate continues to roll. Kansas beat number 17 Iowa State. Iowa State back-to-back terrible losses, tough losses for the Cyclones, 45-36. And with that loss right there, you know who's the leading odds or has the best odds to win the Big 12? Colorado. We're going to talk about Colorado here in a second. How about that? The Buffs. The Buffs have the best odds to win the Big 12. Who would have thought that at the beginning of the year? Not me. Virginia upset number 18 Pitt 24-19 at Pitt. Just credit to the Virginia Cavaliers getting a big win right there. Tony Elliott and squad. Speaking of Colorado, number 20 Colorado beat Texas Tech 41-27. Travis Hunter played 155 snaps in this game. Just remarkable stuff. He continues to be doing it all year, and he's staying healthy in the process. Well, at least to the naked eye he is. He also had 9 catches for 99 yards and a touchdown. Shorter Sanders had a really nice day again. And their defense created, I think they had 6 sacks, a bunch of tackles for loss. Like, defense is coming into form some for Colorado, and they're playing well on the road. Listen, this is a very dangerous team that could find itself in, they are very for sure in the playoff thing, or playoff race, but they need to, I think, find a way to win the Big 12 to get there. Number 21, Washington State wins again. They beat Utah State 49-28. Now, Washington State's a very interesting dilemma here. I don't think they're going to be getting into the playoff, but they're 8-1. Problem is they have to get in as an at-large because they're not in a conference, technically. So they're going to have to find a way to backdoor their way in, but I just don't think they're going to be able to with the strength of schedule they've had this year. Number 23, Clemson beat Virginia Tech 24-14. It wasn't the prettiest display, but they found a way to win. And for Clemson, I think that's just the biggest thing right there. And speaking of finding ways to win, number 24, Missouri beat Oklahoma 30-23. Very wild finish. This fourth quarter had just about everything. Missouri was up to go up 16-9 with 8 minutes left in the game. OU then went on a 12-play, 75-yard drive to tie it with 3 minutes left in the game. Missouri then fumbled it. Oklahoma scooped and scored to go up 23-16 with 2 minutes left. Missouri then went right back down the field. Theo Wee's touchdown with just over a minute to play. And then Oklahoma fumbled it with 20 seconds left. And then Missouri scooped and scored to take the lead and eventually win. And then Eli Drinkowitz at the end of the game has the audacity to think that they're going to the playoffs. No shot. But thanks for playing. How about Army? We're an Army podcast. Go Army. Beat Navy. Staying undefeated again. Another big win at North Texas this time. 14-3. The Black Knights got the win. Capped off by a 21-play, 94-yard drive that took almost 14 minutes off the clock, and it ended with a touchdown pass. How about that? They improved to 9-0, and I believe they have a bye this week. Then they have UTSA and then Navy to round out the year. So Tulane, we're talking about Army in this American Conference race, but Tulane, John Summerall and the Green Wave, another big-time win. This time they beat Temple 52-6. Tulane is 8-2 now. They are ranked 25th in the AP poll now. The newest rankings came out yesterday. They're 6-0 in conference play right now. Right now, if the season ended today, it would be Army and Tulane. Navy on the outside looking in because they slipped up against Rice, allowed Tulane to kind of backdoor their way in here. So Navy did win this weekend. So South Carolina beat Vanderbilt 28-7. Talked about in the preview, because this is one of the preview games we had, which quarterback was going to be able to run the ball better and which team was going to be able to run the ball effectively enough. In general, it was South Carolina. Lenore Sellers was 14-20 for 238 yards. He had a couple touchdowns, and he rushed the ball for 38 yards. But Rocket Sanders rushed for 126 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. He had more rushing yards than Vanderbilt had as a team. Vanderbilt only rushed for 108 total yards, and their defense was able to just not let Diego Pavia do anything with his legs and completely neutralize this Vanderbilt offense. And South Carolina gets a big win. They get into the AP poll now. And how about Arizona State? We talked about it a little bit ago. 35-31, they beat UCF. Arizona State moves on to 7-2. They're right there in the thick of things in this Big 12 race. They'll need some help probably, but listen, they have Kansas State and then Arizona. So Kansas State, BYU, and Arizona. It's a tough schedule to finish out the year, but it's all right there in front of them. And that's this week's edition of Around the Country. I kind of lost track of where I was right there. But listen, this Big 12 race, all these conference races there is no clear nobody's clinched their way. It's all just 5 or 6 teams all still jockeying for position, and we only have 3 weeks left of the season, which is crazy. But here we are. So, all right, we're going to round out the episode with best bets recap. Guys, again, we talked about this. We had a terrible week last week. But I said, just hang with me. We're going to bounce back in a big way. And look at that. 5-2 on the weekend. 5-2. We move to 32-18-1 on the season. How about, thank you, Army. Thank you. Let's see. Army, BYU won. South Carolina did their job. We're going to shout out all of our teams here. So we had Mississippi State covered for us. LSU did not. They did not. They got waxed. But BYU showed up. Colorado showed up. Army showed up, and South Carolina showed up. Georgia and LSU, two biggest disappointments this week, obviously didn't help us out any by getting bamboozled. Both of them did. So, but nonetheless, another outstanding weekend. 5-2 on the weekend. So, I already have a couple plays that I like for this week that I've already may have locked in already. There's a few games I'm waiting for lines to move a little bit, but as always, though, Thursday for the preview, we will have all the best bets given out so you guys can try to make some money because obviously it's working. We're 14 games over 500 right now, so it's not never too late. But we're closing down here on the home stretch here. I want you to be a part of this winning movement. That's all I'm going to say. And the last thing I'm going to say today before we unfortunately have to end today's podcast is that you guys need to subscribe because we are on the road to 200 subscribers. But the only way we can get there is if you guys are subscribing, liking, and sharing the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get it, except for Apple Podcasts. There was a big mix-up at the beginning of the podcast when we created this thing, and unfortunately, we never got there. So maybe one day, but not right now. So make sure you guys are subscribing. If you want to hit me up on the socials, at DeLauder Hunter on Twitter /X, and then Hunter.DeLauder83 on Twitter. We'll be back later this week for Week 12 preview. Until then, make sure you guys watch the show, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.